Hi, we're Lina and Andy, two of the Bellroy co-founders. You're listening to What Have I Missed? A podcast where we have conversations about the ideas we use to help us run Bellroy. Here's Andy to kick off our conversation.
So this conversation isn't as clear as to how it's going to turn out because the place we want to play with has many terms and names that define the general space, but we want to see how we go with this. So we are playing with the idea of modelling, mental models, mental representations, frameworks, map versus territory even. So this is a class of things that are how we form representations that allow us to make sense of a space and operate in a space that is not very concrete, literal things. And to kick it off, we actually want to start by reading a quote from Anders Erickson. So Anders Erickson is considered one of the key researchers in a space referred to as deliberate practice. So how we create structured improvement paths towards mastery. Anders Erickson has worked with a lot of world-class musicians, athletes, chess players, many, trying to understand the processes they use to achieve mastery of a space. I'll dive right into the quote. What sets expert performers apart from everyone else is the quality and quantity of their mental representations. Through years of practice, they develop highly complex and sophisticated representations of the various situations they are likely to encounter in their fields. These representations allow them to make faster, more accurate decisions and respond more quickly and effectively in a given situation. So that quote feels like it's pointing at a very interesting thing, because when we think about running a 100-meter sprint faster than anyone ever has, or playing an incredibly complex piano tune as well as anyone ever has, it feels like there's a whole number of things that are learning established methods and applying them to develop elite performance. But someone that has spent their working life studying this space says actually the thing that sets them apart is the quality and quantity of their mental representations. So that's a little bit unexpected. You'd think it was, does that athlete do the drills? Do they train enough? Do they sprint enough? Do they mix their training? Do they work on nutrition? But Erickson's conclusion is that the way they shape mental representations to then create a landscape and structure to achieve paths to mastery is more important than the other things.
So that's our essay topic for today. Yeah. So, I mean, that was, thank you for doing that intro. It was very nice for me to get to sit back and just listen to the quote and think about it and sort of see what came to my mind as I was thinking about it. And, I think the quality and quantity of their representations, you sort of said that a couple of times, and it definitely stuck as an idea. I think that there's a sense there in that concept where it's very easy to just sort of live your life responding to the thing that comes, whether it's the email or the conversation or the alarm clock or the traffic light, whatever thing kind of presents itself to you, you respond to it. And I think a person can become really very capable as a human by being good at that stuff. But what I think this quote is pointing at, and maybe what we want to try and think about today, is that there's sort of something meta going on for people that they could connect to if they're interested in, where rather than living a life of responding to what comes and what's in front of you and the challenge, you can actually stop and start thinking about how do you organize what's going on in the world in your head, and how do you view it, and how do you do that in a way that it is structured and helpful and then accessible, so that rather than it being that an email comes and you reply to it, it's like an email comes and you think, what does this mean? Why did they say this? What am I learning about the world that I didn't know before? And you have like, I think for me what this means is that you have these prompts and structures. I kind of actually view my mental representations as something like a warehouse in my head. And there's like a human whose job it is to organize it. And sort of if I get a new piece of information, I kind of say to the human, you need to now go off and like organize section ABC10, sort of like, because it's not structured right. And so I think that Erickson is asking people or proposing that there's a thing that you can challenge yourself to do, which is pause and think about the world and organize the structure with which you think about it, and bring in expert opinion and facts and information such that how you process information when it comes to you happens in a structured way. I don't know, that's sort of my spat out response to what's the thing that comes to my mind when I hear that quote and think about this idea.
I think that's really interesting. For me, it's less a warehouse, but I think we're pointing at similar things. It's more a toolkit of existing ways to sense make and to fit patterns. And what's really interesting about the quality, not just the quantity, is that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you only have certain ways to look at the world, if everything's this polarized black and white, it's either this or that, then you're going to miss a lot of nuance. You're going to miss a lot of detail, that the way you're looking at that thing, if people are good and evil, you know, the Disney view of the world with simplistic models where people are good and evil, it just doesn't feel like that plays out in the world. It feels like we're all this complex mix of things. And so if your mental representation of people is there's good people and evil people, you're probably going to be misreading the world constantly. I wanted to just say like constantly, because it makes me think of like an out of control feedback system where, you know, you're trying to like dampen some kind of crazy variability, and you go, oh, that one's evil, and you shoot too far in one direction, and then you say that one's good and you shoot too far in the other direction, and you're constantly swinging, like almost physically. You can sort of feel the visceral swinging of like when everything is black and white in how you represent your model, what's going on, you're always over in one direction or another, and you do miss what is actually the nuance in the middle. So it's interesting. You're talking about them. Sorry, I think you said tools as a toolbox or a tool set.
Yeah,
a tool set, so that we're not relying on just one tool to understand the world and sense make in the world. We're trying to develop a rich toolbox, which is your warehouse, I guess, of interesting things that let us get a head start. So I've heard people describe Elon Musk as working everything out from first principles. I don't believe that's right. I think,
as in, you don't think that's what he's doing?
Correct.
Agree. Yeah.
I think any human operating in this world is already inheriting a whole set of paradigms and lenses and other things. And what I would describe Elon Musk as being reported to do is he steps back a layer or two to earlier stage models that can hold more complexity rather than jumping to if this, then that. Just these heuristics and these tropes that are just, this is the way I respond. If someone throws an aggressive email at me, I throw an aggressive email back at them.
Right.
That feels like quite a simplistic model. I think if what we do is have models that can hold more complexity and nuance, and we can reach back to one that feels fairly fit for purpose for the task we're trying to navigate and orient around, and we've got a rich toolbox of these, then we're not so mechanistic and mechanical in just if this then that. There's more play, there's more scope to reinterpret or shift or move, to orient, to then start planning decisions and actions around. And so I think the mental representations, the frameworks, these mental models, the ones we hold, if we hold flawed ones, they are just breaking our understanding and interaction with reality constantly. If we hold higher quality ones, we can never be fully certain, but we're more likely to get it more right each time we use that as a way to orient and then plan actions in a space.
Yeah, right. And it's interesting that I think it occurred to me that when I think about those frameworks or toolkits, I think that I think we spend a lot of time talking about them with each other. It seems like you can learn them from others. You can, listen to podcasts, read books, look at quotes, and sometimes you can see that other people have frameworks or ways of thinking about things that feels really useful. And I think sometimes, though, you find yourself in a world where they don't exist. And I think that a really critical part of maybe what I think is necessary for the kind of success that Erickson's kind of pointing at is that sometimes you have to build them yourself, and you need to be able to hold enough of the world constant and look at these little pockets of what's happening to be able to say, well, what is a structure that I can put that helps me predict what's going on in this world? And if you can build it a little bit yourself, then I think that's an important way of building your mental representations, rather than always relying on picking them up externally or from others. Because I think like humans are really so different that if what you're doing is just picking them up from others all the time, they're never properly quite exactly shaped right for you. And so I think it's important in this space that you're also innovating the model, shaping it to suit you, having a good model of your own strengths and weaknesses and what kind of models would help. But that feels like an interesting split as well. To what extent are you outsourcing your models, and what extent are you creating your own? And when do you do which one, and how do you assess that feels really important.
I really agree. So what I'd love to do, there's a saying we use a little bit here, which is all models are broken, some are useful. Each of these models is some abstraction of what's happening in the world. And one of the spaces where these themes have really been teased out is this notion of the map versus the territory. And one of the ways I really love to explain that, because we're talking fairly sort of abstract level, this is a little bit more concrete, is if you think of the different types of maps that exist in the world. One of the really interesting ones is the London Underground map. People are probably familiar. It's quite a geometric steps, lines, coloured lines, and that's to navigate London's underground system. And it is...
And like if you're not familiar with that, just like Google London Underground map and you're there.
Iconic design, real breakthrough in simplification and legibility. It was such an influential piece of graphic design work that underground systems around the world have replicated it in some version. And if you think of that London Underground map, if your job is choosing which train line to get on and when to get off at the station, that map took this previously heinously complex map that used to have all sorts of wiggles and lines and intersections and all sorts, and simplified it down to a series of lines with a series of stations so that you could plan your underground journey. And what's fascinating about that map is there are stations that appear a little ways apart on that map that are actually a few blocks apart. So it has chosen to discard geographic proportionality, like the literal distance between stations, compress that down to improve legibility for making one class of decision.
And maybe just to kind of like, because I think you sort of said this in this little segment of like little intro to this section of the idea of the map versus the territory. And I don't know, it just feels like really worth saying clearly out loud. So the idea there is that the territory is the thing. It's like the truth, it's the fact, it's the space, it's everything. It's like, what is London and where are the trains and what do they look like and where are the stations and the people walking around? Like imagine in all of its detail the whole context of the London Underground, and that is the territory. And then what Andy's talking about is the map. Yeah, so what you're talking about is like a particular segment of that deep, rich, full territory being represented by the London Underground map. And so map is mapping one small segment of the thing, and the territory is the thing.
Absolutely. And the map has to simplify it, because if you wanted all the detail, the map would need to be the size of London. It would need to have every single part. And all of a sudden the map is less useful because it's not London.
Usable.
It's not usable.
Yeah.
It's too big. It's massive. Even with infinite scroll, if you're doing satellite imagery for the map, well, that house might have now had a renovation and that person has now moved and now there's a car blocking that or roadworks there. So each map is some form of simplification to make the thing more useful. And that's why we like that notion that all models are broken, as in they break apart in some way because they're abstracting and simplifying reality in some way, but some are useful. Some maps actually work great. London Underground map works great if your job is just navigating the train system of London.
So, and I think we should talk heaps more about all maps are useful, some are broken, or all models are useful, some are broken. But before we go there, I think the thing that's like the emergent concept in that London Underground map that you were pointing at is that it takes the territory from one perspective. And in this case, it's the perspective of a person who is trying to work out where do they begin, which station do they begin at to get to a different station, and what changes do they need to make along the way. And the thing that's super interesting about such a narrow perspective is if you understand the perspective of the map, it is like superpower. It's amazing. It totally tells you exactly how to do that one thing, and it tells you how to do it perfectly. But the other side is that if you don't understand the perspective of the map, you're screwed. Because if you think that London Underground map is like an as the crow flies distance between the stations, you're screwed. Like, so let's say you decide to walk it instead. You can't use it for that, or it gives you wrong information. If you want to work out what the wait time is, and you think that maybe like the size of the dot, you decide that it represents wait time, it's not it. And so it's not that. Like maybe the size of the dot sort of represents how many trains come into it or how many lines had to fit in the dot for the representation to work. You don't know. But maps are like amazing and dangerous, and that it's super important when you get a map of information, you understand what perspective it's giving you. And you really are very careful to assume that it's not the territory or to know that it's not the territory. I think I see this a lot at work where we have a problem. Something's not working and we don't know the territory. You know, like let's just say we can see that like 1% of our orders are not coming into our system properly, right? And we know that's a fact, but we can't look into all of the code and all the data structures and be like, show me exactly where that is. And so what our team's going to be doing in that scenario is producing maps. They're going to take one data cut which says, show me a map of all of the orders over $1,000, and show me a cut of all the orders that had to go via customer support, and show me a map. And when we're trying to like problem solve what's going on in this territory, the only way we can do that is by getting a long series of maps and being really precise in our thinking about what is this map telling us about the world. And I think that when I watch us struggle with a problem, often we're making an error where we think we know what the map is telling us, but it's not. It's telling us something else, and we're messing it up. And so I don't know, I feel like the map and territory idea is super valuable in a bunch of directions, but in the way it shows you just one slice and not all of it. And the power of knowing that when that's happening is extremely, it's mega power if you've got it.
I really agree. And if we want to stick with the map analogy, think of an atlas. And an atlas is a collection of maps where if you're trying to understand country borders, you'll be on a zoomed out view. If you're trying to understand country geography, mountain regions, water systems and deltas, you'll be on a different map. And so an atlas is a collection of maps to help you navigate the geography and political borders of the world. And each map has the things it works well for and the things it doesn't. And understanding the limitations of each map is a critically important part. So to play with another Bellroy specific model, early on we realized we wanted Bellroy to help dissolve borders, create frictionless movement, help people go beyond just their immediate comfort zone and spend more time in the world. And we tried using lots of different language out to do that. We had lots of different words to say that, Venn diagrams, other things. One of the maps that has emerged over the last year or two for us is what we call our carry worlds. And so we'll create a link to this, but if you can imagine 4 circles overlapping in a Venn diagram. On the left top circle, we're calling that around town. The right top circle, we're calling that workplace. The left bottom circle, we're calling that outdoors. And the right bottom circle, we're calling that travel. So those circles now overlap. And what we essentially have on that map is from work, which is generally workplace oriented, but can move beyond that, down to play, which is often in outdoors, but there's many other forms of play, from near, which is often the sort of around town or immediate spaces, to far, which is the more traditional definition of travel. All of a sudden, we're creating this representation of 4 major worlds that we want to help customers be able to navigate. And this map began to emerge when we were trying to capture a clearer, more legible way to describe that sort of frictionless movement around the world that we wanted. But when you're thinking about moving around the world, if you begin with 400 locations from mountains to ocean, if you think from different styles of work, remote work and in-office work and hybrid work, if you have too many classes of things, the map isn't as useful as a simplified London Underground map. So what we've created here is a simplified map that is trying to take it to a level of simplification that makes it legible, but not beyond that where it all breaks down into simplistic and you just miss too many things. And that Carry Worlds map is actually something we're toying with. How much further can we use this in the business now to do we locate a design in one world? Say, let's locate this new bag design as a workplace-oriented design. But then how do we have it bleed out through remote work into around town? How do we have it move into business travel, which is a form of work, but it's now overlapping with travel, and then down into travel? So what we've created is a map that is a way to sense make all the worlds we're trying to navigate for a customer, and then start to have something that lets us think about products and communication and education and these things to talk about navigating worlds from work to play, near to far. That feels fairly encompassing, but then still have a level of specificity for when we're trying to create a specific bit of content or a specific product. So I guess this is one map that has been emergent over the life of Bellroy. It really only took its form. I think when we first did it, we had 5 circles that included home. But then we realized really Bellroy grows most of its relevance when you're moving out the front door and you're starting to tackle the world. And so we haven't shown home as one of those worlds. Even though Bellroy is still relevant in the home, it feels like by simplifying that out and having only 4 worlds from near to far, work to play, it made it more legible and more useful in planning, navigation, and activities.
Yeah, I think it's super helpful, to have a look at this map while we're talking about it, because we can't really do the image justice. But I think for me, the overlay of near and far and work and play, so those 2 diagonal spectrums on this map, feels like that's a really good example of us pulling out. We've got the whole territory of like the world where you carry things, right? That's the territory. And I think the concept of this map of saying sometimes when you're carrying, you're close to home, you're near your hub, you're near where you are. But sometimes when you're carrying far, you're moving far, you're traveling far. I think that actually is a mental representation, to sort of be really specific. That's one spectrum around which you can think about what might be a challenge that you have to navigate when you're traveling. Like, are you sort of popping in and out from home? Is it very near? And I think one of the things that really articulated that near concept was actually COVID, when travel became very near. It was very much like you were leaving your home and you were going to the supermarket and coming home, and you basically were only carrying face mask, a phone, hand sanitizer, whatever it was, just those small things. And I feel like it was out of that context that we really saw the idea of near carry as being a real thing. And then obviously that's so contrasted with traveling and going far away. And so that model of near versus far, I think, slowly then became part of our language, right? Of like, how are we thinking about carry? And then I think work and play had a similar, not timing wise, but they're similarly interesting models to think about what are you doing. One of the things about when you're working is you're often in a context with other people and you're trying to do things like communicate how much is what you're doing right now the priority, and does it look like you've got 10 other things hanging off your bag, or do you look focused and organised? And those were the themes that people are trying to think about when they're work carrying, versus when they're playing. They've often got their own personal objectives and things that they want to do and goals that they're trying to meet. And so when we think about a bag, is it going to be primarily used in a work context and then supported by play, or is it primarily play context supported by work? That's a different model that we're using to think about how we're designing features into the product and specifying how it should work, and then how we're communicating it to the customer. And so I think that within those worlds, those diagonal spectrums of near and far and work and play feel like really important mental representations that we're using at Bellroy to help us understand what's really going on with this product and with this customer, and how do we sort of bring them together.
I really agree. Now, we could riff on this forever. I'm aware we need to start sort of drawing a bow around it soon.
Can I just say something funny? I feel like we could call this podcast What Have I Missed? And we could also call it We Could Riff on This Forever, because I think it's possible we've said that we might say that at the end of every conversation. So
I think one of the themes we've really spoken about is these quivers of models or these atlases of maps, this notion of holding a set that mean you're not always viewing a space or a thing through only one perspective. You've got an ability to move around it and see it through different angles. I think something else that we really need to say, though, is different maps have different correlations with reality. And I think this is a really important theme that I think as we've had a previous conversation, Lina, around what sorts of maps are pointing at specific objective things. Like if you think of physics at, a Newtonian level rather than, subatomic kind of chaos theory, it's fairly knowable laws that have a high correlation with reality. They break down at certain scales, but they're quite knowable. They're quite highly correlated with reality. If we think about models of a person or even more a society, those correlations would be much less.
Right.
Do you want to riff on that just for a sec?
Totally. I mean, I love the idea of like knowing when you're at when you're looking at a model, when are you like dealing with physics? When is that your constraint? Because we can't fight physics. If we've got product in Sydney and we got to get it to LA, like physics, there's no way around that. And I think sort of knowing what physics is and knowing that constraint is really useful. And I think the thing about those ideas is that they are deeply knowable. We have so much thinking over many hundreds of years that mean when you sort of think about something like gravity, it's a model of how the world works. It's not actually real. Like there's no sort of number that's sort of written somewhere that, someone lifted up the carpet and found it. It's a model of how the world works. And it's a damn good one. Like it predicts for our life experience on Earth every time what's going to happen when the cup drops off the table. If you're on Mars, it's not such a good predictor, right? But within our context, it's excellent. And that was sort of where, Andy, you pointed out earlier that all models are broken, but some are useful. And that even something like gravity, if you put it on Mars, the Earth version of it gets broken. I think that it is tempting to not even try sometimes to model the things that are hard, like people, or economics or societies or zeitgeists. It's quite tempting to say that is so hard and unknowable and what I say is probably going to be wrong that often people don't even give it a go. And I think we would push against that. I personally love to push against that and say, sometimes you can actually give it a go and do something that is useful. Broken, but probably useful. If you have to imagine having a difficult conversation with someone, you can practice what you're going to say and you can ask yourself the question, will they be upset when I say that or will they be happy? And often you can get a gut response that sort of gives you an answer, and that is you using your model of that person to better predict how the future's going to go. And so I really think that it's easy with mental representations to rely on the knowable ones and the high certainty ones. And I think it's true you should do that because it's useful. But actually, I think where some really amazing power can come is if you have the bravery to try and build out a model in a space where it's quite unknowable and where you might be wrong. But, remembering that we're in a world that if you can be right more than 50% of the time, you're going to, on average, move forward. And so I think trying to build your mental representations in spaces that are difficult to know and often uncertain and maybe where nobody else has, I think there's a lot of good that can come from that.
I love that. And, already asking ourselves, what have we missed? The bit I just wanted to riff on that a tiny bit is nothing is 100% certainty. We're not 100% certain that the sun will rise tomorrow. We're not 100% certain of anything. Everything is probability mass. And when you think of that same, it's more probable that the sun will rise tomorrow, it's less probable that it won't, you can start to estimate probabilities. Mm-hmm. And I think models, the more correlated with reality, the higher the estimate of the probability you can have. And the less correlated, or the more you're generalizing, the more you have to leave your probability mass a bit lower.
Yeah.
More uncertainty in it.
But it doesn't, just because it gets a low probability mass, it doesn't mean it's a non-useful model, right?
I really agree.
It's okay to have a model that's wrong 20% of the time, because a model that's right 80% of the time, that's really useful versus no model. It's better to have that.
And if others are operating assuming it's completely random, and then you're operating knowing that you have a 3% correlation with reality, if that plays out enough times, you will come out ahead in your decision-making abilities. So often there's an arbitrage opportunity there to develop some sort of a model in a very uncertain space. And if there's any correlation with reality, that will move you towards better decisions than others can make in that space over time.
Yeah.
All right. So
I think we've missed a lot.
Yeah, I think we've missed a huge amount.
That's okay.
Anything else we need to say before we wrap that?
I think that's okay. Yeah. Perhaps this would be one where I think we're super interested in feedback on this idea and which direction it could move in. This was a fun conversation. I don't think we knew where it was going to go, really.
And I think we will provide some links. I think Farnham Street is an amazing asset for gathering mental models, publishing books around it. Charlie Munger has been an incredible thought leader in this space, publishing some really interesting concepts and models that help Berkshire Hathaway and Charlie's activities in the world navigate the world. We'll share some links to further explore this.
Yeah, we'll point to the Anders Erickson, and we'll also share our Carrie Worlds model, so you can have a look at the model that we've talked about.
Good day.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. You can find details and relevant links in the show notes. We have almost certainly missed something. If you have a perspective that you think could complement our thinking in this space, or a topic we should explore, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us questions or comments in the Q&A section on Spotify, or you can email us, podcast@bellroy.com. Bye for now.